So maybe you're looking to get into a self-development and you don't know what exact book to get started with. Well, my name is Marcus. This is Discover Ignite, where we discover possibilities and ignite change. And today I got a book review for you guys that I think you're going to want to stick all the way through, because the book I'm going to be reviewing is a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. So hold on, stick tight, and get ready to have your life changed. So I must admit, right, before reading this book, right, I read probably maybe a handful of self-development books before I picked up this book. And this book is one of those books that essentially is ranked like in the top 3 on any self-development list that you come across, right? And there's good reason why this is. Because this book, right, Dale Carnegie was extremely successful, and he studied a lot of extremely successful people and has come up with some great knowledge that he shares in this book, these great principles to apply to your life. And this is one of those books you essentially just read every year, right? Because it's got great knowledge in it, right? There's essentially gold nuggets all the way through this book. And 2 of the particular principles in this book are principles I have applied all the way through. You know, after reading this book, I apply all the time, and I'm always trying to be aware of these particular principles. Now, this book goes into a bunch of different principles. I believe there's like 8 principles which to apply, right? And a lot of these principles essentially are how to essentially build relationships, right? Now, whether that's a personal relationship, whether that's a business relationship, right? This is one of those books you need to read, right? Because life is essentially based off of relationships, right? Personal and, business, whether that's for your career or whether that's just a personal relationship that you have. But nonetheless, I mean, this book, right, one of the greatest principles that always really stuck with me was the fact that, you need to always reiterate people's names, right? Because people hold great value in their names. And you'll notice that if somebody, mispronounces your name or says it wrong, whatever the case is, a lot of times you are quick to correct them, right? And for good reason, because you hold a lot of value in your name. And you notice that when you say people's name, that automatically draws your attention in, right? It automatically makes you focus on what that person is saying. And a lot of times people will be messing around on their phone, and you say somebody's name and they'll perk up, right? They know, like they may be in Wonderland, right, at some point, but when they hear their name, they'll focus on whatever you're saying, right? And so ultimately, that is one of the principles I've taken from this book, because, in every interaction I have, I always try to make sure to learn that person's name quickly and then try to reiterate it. And every time I come back and meet that person, make sure you say their name, and make sure before you leave whatever kind of interaction you have with that person to again reiterate their name. And people really appreciate that. They really appreciate the fact that you know their name. They feel like, there's something that you are paying attention to them, that you are focusing on only them, right? And that's ultimately what you're trying to do with this principle. And so this book kind of goes to a bunch of different principles like that. And another big principle I've always had was, a lot of times we are very selfish, right? In our thoughts and what we're talking about in any kind of relationship and any interaction we have, right? We're always more worried about what we're going to say next and not really focus on what that person is saying, and allowing that conversation to really, get some momentum, right? Because a lot of times when you're talking with someone, they leave breadcrumbs essentially all the way through the conversation. And it's good to focus on those breadcrumbs, right? So you can continue that conversation going. And a lot of times in the book, it talks about this, right? It talks about, using this principle and being genuinely interested in that person by listening, right? Not worried about what you're going to say, just follow the breadcrumbs and continue to ask questions, right? And you realize that people are like, man, that person, I'm really interested in that person because they care about what I have to say. And yes, this takes a lot of correction, takes a lot of self-awareness to take yourself out of the equation, right? And to pull yourself from, thinking about the next thing you're going to say, thinking about where that conversation is going, and just focusing on what they're saying. And again, jumping back to different breadcrumbs that they leave during the conversation. So this is another great principle that I've learned from this book. And it's one of those books that you essentially read every year, right? Like I read this every year, and I've been reading, the first time I picked up this book, I think was 5 years ago. And so I want to read it every year. I do read it at least once every year, sometimes two. Just all depends, right? Because these principles are good to reiterate. And there's a lot of the other principles I don't remember, but they are phenomenal principles, right? And they hold great value, and they allow your relationships in your life to really bloom, right? While you continue to try to incorporate this and be mindful of this, right? And there are many different things, right? And one of the principles even being, just smile, right? And how people react to that and how people feel, right? Not only in the smiling when you first see somebody, but mentioning their name and then focusing on what they're telling you and interacting with them. And in doing so, you realize that people become more interested in you because of this fact, right? That you're not a selfish person. Now, I myself, it's natural to think about, selfish thoughts and stuff like that, but to correct yourself and again, try to focus back on that person, and you'll realize that it helps a lot. It helps in your career. It helps in business. It helps in personal relationships. And iterating these principles, right, and applying them to your life. That's ultimately the thing, right? Is to take what you learn and apply it. And this is one of those books that's just, black and white, right? It really gives you solid principles that you can apply tomorrow and see the effects, right? Like when I started mentioning people's names all the time, I noticed the difference, right? You see people's faces light up because they notice that you remember their name, right? And their name holds great value, and you see the shift in their body language. You see the shift. You see all these different things that if you're paying attention, you can notice these things when you start applying these things. And that's a great thing about this book, right? This is why this book essentially sets the bar, right, for any personal development book out there, because it does these things and it does it so well. And as far as like any cons of this book, I had absolutely no cons with this book, right? This is one of those books that again sets the precedent. So to have a con for this book, where a lot of times I say there aren't any cons to a lot of the books that I essentially review, this book is by far one of those ones that have got to be in your top 3 books that you will read at least once a year, right? And continue building relationships. If you've always struggled with relationships, this will really help you, or help you focus on those things that matter, right? Because Dale Carnegie went after and studied a lot of successful people and how they were able to get to where they were by developing relationships in a manner that, you genuinely care about what the other person says and does and all that thing and all these things without, so much worried about yourself, right? Kind of taking yourself out of the equation, not essentially 100%, right? But focusing on that person and providing value for that person. And I think that's why this book is great for anybody, right? If you haven't read this book, now I know a lot of people have probably read this book that's, has anything to do with personal development, but if you haven't read this book, I would highly, highly, highly suggest that you pick this book up, because this book can change your life, and it's changed my life. It changed my perspective on dealing with people in relationships, right? And understanding what works, right? Because I've applied just about every one of these principles, right? And every one of these principles works tremendously well and is highly, highly effective. And so I hope this video has helped you guys. If you guys are interested in this book, I'll actually leave it down in the description. If you did enjoy this video, remember to hit that like on the way out. And until next time, I will see you guys later.